Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, people of all races, colors, and creeds, welcome back to the greatest show on earth. Greg Anthony here, right after that Memorial Day weekend. Wow. Hope you could at least go out to your backyard without getting arrested. Well, anyway, today I wanted to take it easy, and I've got an interview for you from a Dr. Andrew Kaufman. And Andrew sets the record straight from a medical point of view of what's the heck is going on here with all this BS that the White House and the rest of those merry band of sorcerers is spreading. So let's listen to Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Hey, I'll be back tomorrow with more jokes and more fun about this crazy world we live in. So don't worry about it. Back tomorrow with more insanity, more COVID-19 insanity. Hey folks, Greg Anthony here from the Investigative Journal, and I've collected some information today from a Dr. Andy Kaufman, a well-respected doctor whose videos have been taken off of YouTube. So we're going to try to get some of the clips that I gathered from the weeks or so that he's talked about this and really sets the record straight on really what's going on. Now, we've talked about COVID-19 pandemic on my show for months. The government has really clamped down on you, taken away your rights, and they have no verification that even this COVID virus exists, whether the testing is even accurate, and basically they're in full gear to lock us down for a long, long time. So listen to Dr. Andy Kaufman. He's a well-respected doctor with credentials as long as my arm, and he's going to really set the record straight. You need this information in your back pocket. Here's some clips I gathered that have been taken off of YouTube. Okay, here you go. This is about 20 minutes long, and it's well worth listening to.
In an unprecedented way, we see all of the governments around the world, with very few exceptions, all adopting the same policy at the same time frame, right? This tells us that this is a highly coordinated effort, right, internationally, and it tells us that there's a group of people or individuals who are directing the governments essentially what to do, right? And so this is very compatible with, this globalist agenda, moving towards a one world government, and with tighter control over the population, with a reduced population, with a new financial, monetary and currency system. And there's evidence for all these aspects, and I think the overall plan has been well laid out in the United Nations document, Agenda 21, later changed to Agenda 2030. There are many other supporting documents, like you mentioned, the Rockefeller document, and there are several others that essentially give all the details to this plan, and they all correlate with the policies that are taking place right now. They basically want to inject genes into us, and they are using this procedure called electroporation, where they apply an electric current through 2 extra needles with the vaccine that create little holes in our cells that allow the DNA to go inside our own cells, and then they are supposed to then make foreign proteins that supposedly generate immunity. But all I can describe this as is they want to make us into genetically modified organisms. This is the exact same procedure that they would be using to make any other genetically modified organism. Well, Spiro, because this is the only important thing for me to do now is get this information out so that we can prevent ourselves from living in a horrible, horrible future. And, I have 2 young children, and they are my main motivating factor, that I don't want them to live in a world where they have no freedom. And that's where we're headed right now. And so whatever risks there are, They're risks that I simply have to take. That's a very good question, and the data is very difficult to interpret because there are a lot of purposeful errors in the data. Like, for example, with all of the instructions to put COVID-19 as the cause of death on death certificates, even when in many conditions that it is not related to the cause of death. And this comes, directly from the CDC and other health agencies. So what I've done is, in order to take this error out of the consideration, is just to look at the overall mortality from all causes and compare that to previous years. And actually, the CDC has a page on their website where they've done this. They've compiled the average weekly mortality from the prior 3 years and compared that to the current year-to-date mortality on a weekly basis. And I've been following that. It's updated on a daily basis, and every week a week is added. And essentially what it's shown is that there is roughly the same amount of people dying this year, slightly less according to their statistics, currently 2% less than last 3 years on average. So what this tells me is that there's actually no indication of a new illness causing any excess mortality, despite however it's labeled. And I know we're going to talk about the tests in more detail, but the tests are not measuring a virus and are not accurate in terms of how they correlate with disease. And in fact, there's been no error rate calculated at all for the tests. My opinion overall is that this pandemic is a completely manufactured public relations marketing operation. And there's actually no virus, no disease, but there are major changes in government policies in virtually all areas of public policy. As we know, of course, limiting our individual freedoms, but also the financial consequences, the food supply chain, the telecommunications infrastructure, and the list goes on and on. Well, normally people are dying all the time, and now what we see is that the hospital beds are essentially closed to people with non-COVID related illness. So people are not going to the hospital, and they're dying at other places instead of the hospital. So whereas, nursing home patients in the past, when they are ill, they would be sent to the hospital, and most likely they would die there, now they're dying in the nursing home. The same thing with elderly and infirm people living in the community. They would normally, in past years, be going to the hospital when they got worse and would most likely die there when their time comes. And now we're seeing those people dying at home in the community. So it gives the perception that there's a new illness and that people are dying in places that we don't normally see, and it makes it appear as if they're dying in higher numbers. But that's not actually what the CDC's own data collection shows. Well, yeah, so the test is kind of a big quagmire, and it's definitely not reliable, and in fact, we don't really know exactly what it's testing for. So the main test that is being used is this PCR test, or technically RT-PCR, which is used to amplify small strands or small amounts of strands of RNA. That means that it's not testing for a virus, and in fact, there's been no virus that has been isolated from any samples of any patients with a respiratory illness. They have made claims as such, but I can certainly explain in detail that they didn't actually find a virus. But the way I understand they developed this PCR test is that they took samples of lung fluid from some sick individuals initially in China, and they basically reconstructed a sequence of RNA. Through a process where they combine short strands of RNA by a method called alignment, and sort of reconstruct what they call a viral genome. Now, normally, if you wanted to obtain the genome of a virus, right, and this has been done, for example, for bacteriophages, which are perhaps misrepresented but have been called a virus that infects bacteria, what they would do is isolate and purify the bacteriophage particles, and then once they're in a pure state with no contamination, they could then do a chemical characterization of the structure of those particles. And that would include extracting the genetic material and performing a full sequence of the genetic material to obtain an entire genome. And that's been done for bacteriophages. But that's not what has been done for this SARS-CoV-2 virus that they allege to have identified in these studies. Instead, what they've done is taken an impure sample of lung fluid and not purified it at all, but just used PCR probes looking for specific sequences that they've already identified as being related to viruses, and then using that to reconstruct bits of DNA and combining them into a model that they say represents the genome or the entire set of genetic material of this virus. But since they didn't obtain it from a purified viral particle, there's really no way to know exactly what the source of that genetic material is. But most of the genetic material that would be present in the lung fluid of an ill individual would be our own genetic material, and also that of other microorganisms that normally live in our body or were involved in an infectious process in those people. So these could easily represent strands of RNA that are human and that are bacterial. But the thing is, we just really don't know, because it's never been compared to something that was obtained directly from a purified virus. So it's measuring these RNA strands of unknown significance. And the way that they allege that this is a coronavirus family, and in fact they say it's related to SARS-CoV-1, which is the virus that they used the same procedures, by the way, to say was the cause of the SARS outbreak in 2003. So they basically looked at the sequence that they reconstructed by this artificial method and compared it to the sequence that they reconstructed by the same artificial method from the SARS-CoV-1 virus, and say that they're almost 80% identical, therefore they are part of the same coronavirus family or they're related. Now, just to contrast that, when you compare the entire genetic sequence of humans versus chimpanzees, they're 96% identical. So that's much higher, and yet you wouldn't say that we are chimpanzees or the chimpanzees are humans. So they're relating these sequences together that are reconstructed arbitrarily and saying because of this 80% identity that it's a coronavirus and related to SARS-CoV-1. So it's a huge stretch by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, there's no way really to confirm that this is a real entity or really related to something else that also we don't know if it's a real entity at all. So when you subject yourself to this test, you're basically, and this is without considering any of the pitfalls of the PCR method itself, right, which there are some. So even without considering that, you just don't know exactly what you're measuring. And so in some field tests where they've tried to use mathematical models to calculate an error rate, they've come up with a number like 80% false positive. So that means, 4 out of 5 people with a positive test don't even have what they say that they have. Well, it goes even deeper than that, Spiro, because they didn't even do a control group. So, one of the basic rules of doing a scientific experiment is that you have a negative control group so you can isolate the effects of a single variable, right? And in this case, the variable would be the genetic material from a virus from a sick person, right? So what they could have done is taken the lung fluid from people who did not have the illness and make sure that they don't find the same genetic sequence in those people, right? And this is a very standard thing. Like every time I've done any kind of experiment that was going to be published, there was always had to be a control group. And they didn't do this basic step. There's no control group. But if they would have done that, most likely they would have found the same genetic sequence in that control group of healthy people's lung fluid. So that would have been really useful. Now, of course, you need to also do this with more patients, right? So the original study comes from China, where they examined the lung fluid from patients from the food market in Wuhan. Okay, but they only had 9 patients, and they could only extract this material from 7 of the 9. And that's the total set. So it wasn't like they had 250 cases. For example, which would give it a lot more validity. Then the same exact procedure has been done several times since then in different places. But to my recollection, it's only been done with a single patient. So, right, that's been done in Korea. There's a group in Canada who haven't published yet. And there's one other publication, I can't recall where it's from off the top of my head. But essentially, they've done the same exact procedure in all those different studies and have gotten slightly different genetic sequences, by the way, but they say that that's explained by the virus is mutating. Yeah, absolutely. So there was a paper in 2003 that claimed to satisfy Koch's postulates for the SARS-CoV-1 virus, right, which they relate to this current alleged virus. It was really fascinating how this played out, but let me just remind everyone that Koch's postulates are a set of rules put forth by the proponents of germ theory, because what we're really talking about is germ theory, right, which says that some agent of a microorganism outside of your body comes in and invades and causes disease. So these are a sign of some common sense rules that you should basically have a disease that's identifiable, be able to extract a microorganism that's the cause from the people sick with that disease, but not from people who are healthy. And then you can isolate that infectious agent out of the sick people, and you can give it to a healthy person or animal host and cause the same disease, and then also re-isolate it from them. And this was attempted to be applied to viruses when they were first thought to be discovered under the electron microscope, but no one was successful at, as far as I know, even the first step of isolating the virus from people with the disease. So they tried to modify this a couple of times, and the one modification was based on an article from Thomas Rivers. And he basically reasoned that it was too difficult to prove Koch's postulates for viruses, so we should ease up on some of the criteria. And so in that 2003 article that I mentioned, although in the title of it says Koch's postulates were satisfied, in the first or second paragraph it said that they actually used Rivers' criteria, which was an adaptation of Koch's postulates. So right there you see fraud in how this information is represented. They also misinterpreted Rivers' paper and synthesized 6 criteria, but really they weren't 6 criteria talked about in the Rivers' paper. And then they mentioned that the first 3 of the 6 were satisfied by these other publications. And so I looked at those, and they followed the same exact procedure that I described for SARS-CoV-2, which didn't isolate any virus. So basically the first criterion or the second criterion of Rivers was not satisfied. And then, of course, they didn't actually satisfy any of the other criteria. One of them is quite simple, actually. It's filterability. And that's really important to purify a virus particle because it's much smaller than all of the other cells, and you can purify it substantially just by putting it through a filter. And this is never done in the studies that claim to isolate a novel virus. Spiro, so you're hitting all the important points. And yeah, so let me just correct that satisfying Koch's postulates actually doesn't even prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. It just gives you a fair degree of certainty. And it's never been satisfied for any of these viruses. So, and it's true, like I haven't seen evidence for one virus that this has been satisfied, and other researchers who have looked into this perhaps more in depth than I have also not found any example where it's been satisfied or even come close to being satisfied. So this is, what I consider dogma, really, but it's been perpetuated. And I think, I'm not saying that there's a conspiracy that all these scientists are in on. I think they just grow up in this system and learn these techniques and are being basically told that this is how you prove this virus exists, right? And it's based really on this theoretical model that's pieced together from little strands of genetic material into a theoretical model, but they never actually have the purified structure of the virus, where they can show you exactly what it looks like on a photograph, and then where they can show the chemical structure of it. Instead, they're just essentially basing all of that information on a theoretical model that they've never shown experimentally. And that most of the scientists that come up, that's the way they're taught to do it. Then they get their papers published, and then they get job offers, and they get to defend their thesis successfully. And they're basically part of that system, and they keep perpetuating these procedures forward. And I haven't seen more than 1 or 2 examples of a virologist actually questioning this with respect to what about just how come we don't have a control in our experiments, right? A basic principle of scientific method is to have a control. And so they basically are just kind of going along and not really thinking about it critically, and that's how this kind of dogma is perpetuated. From the point of view of us as like regular people and citizens, and even the scientists grow up this way from a very young age. We're taught that we pass germs to each other, and that's how we get sick, and we need to cover our mouth and nose, right? And be very careful to stay away from other people when we're sick. So we kind of perpetuate this model that we think, there are germs out there trying to come and get us. And, one of the main corollaries of if there are germs out there trying to come and get us, well, what can we do? We can't do anything, right? All we can do is rely on the experts to give us, germ-killing chemicals, right? Yeah, well, I think it actually can be quite dangerous to take some of that stuff too seriously because, I'm sure that there are top secret labs that are researching all kinds of weapons, right? I have no doubt about that. But I don't have specific information, and I don't think too many other people, can really get the information out about what's going on in those laboratories. But I'll tell you, if there's really no biological model for a virus that causes disease, I'm not sure what they're engineering exactly, but I imagine it would be extremely difficult to create some kind of biological organism that would cause disease, because most of the time when we have parasitic problems, they're opportunistic. They're there because there's something not right in our body, and they're actually trying to help us get rid of that, but in the process they may get out of control and cause us problems, right? But I'm not aware of any organisms that come in and take over when you're healthy. So I think that would be a really tall order, and I'm not sure that it's even possible. But if they did want to make us sick, the easiest thing would be to put toxins into our bodies. And there's many ways that this can be done, and it has been done. For example, they're putting fluoride into our water supply, which is a known toxin to the central nervous system. And even the CDC put out a guidance in the early 2000s instructing parents of newborns not to use fluoridated water to mix baby formula because it would affect the children's neurologic development, right? Yet they put it in our water. You can look what happened in Michigan with the lead pipes and the lead poisoning from the water, right? And with the vaping, that's an interesting story because initially the vaping technology was like made by a bunch of small startup companies, and they started getting successful. And actually, I think quite a number of people were able to quit smoking tobacco and switch over to that and possibly even get completely off. And it seemed like a relatively positive change. And then the big tobacco companies started acquiring all of those little vaping companies because they were successful and started to become competition. And once that happened, and I know that there were some small companies that got squeezed out because they wouldn't sell out. And that's when you started hearing reports of people coming in with respiratory problems to the hospital because they're probably putting the same kind of chemicals in the vaping fluid that they've been putting in tobacco products, which is responsible for almost all the tobacco-related illness. So it's hard to say, like there may be different things going on in different places, and many of them may just be due to commercial enterprises, not necessarily a government program. But overall, getting back to the mortality figures, really we haven't seen excess mortality. So if there's any kind of strategy like this, I don't see evidence that it's been deployed. Now, am I concerned that it will be deployed with a second wave or a future part of this psychological operation? Well, yeah, absolutely, I'm concerned about that.
Okay, that was Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Pretty good information, right? So make sure you pass that around to your friends, and also make sure you go to greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com and get many, many more stories on many things regarding the Vatican-led New World Order. That's greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com. And we'll be back in the second half hour to tell you why it's so dangerous to wear masks.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, people of all races, colors, and creeds, you can only listen to the show if you wear a mask. Yes, you're too dangerous to me. If you're not wearing a mask, please put it on, because those viruses will transport right from your room into my microphone, and you're going to give me the COVID virus. That's about the situation when you go to one of these stores now, you know, that tell you you can't get in, go shopping, unless you have your mask on. You know, I'm having fun with this. And I take an extra $5 with me every day in dollar bills. The last guy, I went to one of these drugstores to get some aspirins, you know. And the guy said, "You can't come in without a mask." I said, "Buddy, come over here. How'd you like," you know, I said, "You know what? Why don't you take this dollar bill as a token of my friendship? You know, I'm a rich guy and I like to give money to people." He took the dollar, let me in without the mask. Give it a try. And think of ways to give it to people. You know, don't let them think it's a bribe. You know, I did something the other day. I walked into this Office Depot. And, you know, the guy said, "Put your mask on." And I I said, "Wait a minute." And I went to my knee, you know, I dropped down and I said, "Oh, I dropped the dollar. You must have dropped the dollar, sir. Here's your dollar." He let me right in. You know, there's a way around these stupid laws. And I've been doing this for years. That's why I went to law school. And that was to figure out how many laws I could break. You know, I don't get into the big laws like most lawyers do. You know, SEC laws, inside trading, you know, bribe a judge for $1 million, buy him a little piece of property if you allow, you know, you rule in my favor. I don't get into that. I do little things like, I don't like parking meters. And so I go around looking for parking meters that I don't have to pay. Yeah, I just don't pay. And you know what? I figured out over the years that the fines I have got far outweigh, are much less, having trouble recovering from this Oh, did I have a Memorial Day celebration? Boy, I went out and walked around my backyard a little bit. Yeah. Couldn't step out my front door. There were COVID virus tracers all over. I walked out my front door. One guy said, "Okay, can I take your temperature?" Oh, my God. Then I walked next door and he said, "Have you had your COVID virus antibody test?" He wanted to do that. I walked farther. "Did you get your We're practicing on vaccinations just to make sure you know how to get, And by the time I got to the corner, they wanted to, know everything about me, where I'd been for the last 2 weeks, who I talked to. I said, "Look, buddy, I don't even remember who I talked to 5 minutes ago. I'm not good at this." So, just shut up with these people. Just say, "You're breaking my constitutional rights, and I'm not going to allow you to interrogate me like Nazi Germany." Give them some, good old-fashioned American, what. Don't fall down to these people. And they're hiring these COVID virus tracers by the thousands. There's a website. Go to it. It's called Indeed. Sign up for it. I do it for contract lawyer work. And I'm starting to see like hundreds of these companies working together with governments that are hiring contract COVID virus trackers, tracers, and testers. Insane. That's why they that's why they caused all this unemployment. So all these people would have to rush to get these jobs to spy on you, the great American citizen. But anyway, if you're going to wear a mask, you can't listen to the show. I mean, it's ridiculous. And what I did, I've read a number of things. I've read there's a doctor on the web. Not many of these guys ever talk against the AMA. It's kind of like the American Bar the ABA, the American Bar Association. They police themselves like the Vatican, It's the same principle. You got a priest molesting 20,000 children. "Oh, we'll take care of it with the Vatican justice." Yeah, you're right. They send him to another church, and he does it again. Then they send him somewhere else, and by the time he got through all 50 states in America, then they send him overseas. By that time, it's up to 300,000 kids. That's their system of justice. And the ABA is similar. You either toe the line or forget about it. You practice law. I call it practice criminality. That's exactly what's going on in most cases. And these lawyers, let me tell you, are just laughing at all this because they're going to be taking these cases, you think people are even going to sue anybody here because your rights are being violated like Berlin? No. This is a joke. And I'm telling you, just stop, get my COVID virus. It's called an information packet. It's got some legal information in there. It's not meant to give you any kind of legal advice. Isn't that something? Don't give anybody any advice. I don't have any advice to give anybody. In fact, most Americans are sellouts anyway. I don't like them. So that's what our country's turned out to be. But anyway, Dr. Blaylock has talked about the dangers of a mask, and I've talked about it really simply over the last 3 months. And it just doesn't make sense to me because once you breathe in these toxins, they stay in your nose, they go in your olfactory nerve, up right into your brain. It's real dangerous. And one other thing I wanted to mention, if you're a painter in New York, and they can't require you to wear a mask until you get a physical to say you're healthy enough to wear a mask because they're dangerous. So I looked around, and I read Blaylock's information. It's technical. But then I looked around and found this guy from Brass Check TV who did about an 18-minute clip on Blaylock. And he talks about it really in a much better way than I could. And you got to listen to it. And if you wear a mask after listening to this, you know what? You're crazier than a loon. And I mean that. But anyway, you got to figure out ways to get around wearing them. Try to bribe somebody, but don't make them think it's a bribe. When you're going into stores, if you can't, find a store that doesn't care about masks. If not, starve on the street and just put a sign out. I will not wear a mask, and I'll die here until until you guys get some sense into you. You know, if you're going to listen to these people, I mean, it's crazy. Would you listen to me if I told you to jump off the Empire State Building? Would you listen to me if I said, why don't you take a raft and float down the Niagara Falls? Hey, why don't you go up to Trump Tower and jump out the window? Would you do that? No. Well, most Americans are doing that. They probably all would do that if Trump said it, or somebody in government like Fauci. Oh, let's go. If we jump off the Empire State Building, we won't get the COVID virus. And then when we hit the pavement, they'll say we died of COVID virus. Oh, my God. What a world we live in. But here is Brass Check TV. And I wanted you to listen to this, because if you wear a mask after this, like I said, you're crazier than a loon. Here you go.
And I'd like to read an article for you written by Russell Blaylock. He's an MD, and it's very important. And here's what he has to say. By wearing a mask, the exhaled viruses will not be able to escape and will concentrate in the nasal passages, enter the olfactory nerves, and travel directly to the brain. All right, so let's break this down, because it sounds dramatic, and it's not dramatic at all. It's a simple statement of anatomical fact and physical reality. Okay, you wear a mask to keep the viruses from coming in, right? And you wear a mask to keep the viruses supposedly from going out, right? Where do the viruses go, assuming you have any? And bacteria and other pathogens, where do they go when you wear a mask? They go on the inside of your mask, and they collect, right? I'm having to spell this out because apparently Fauci and all the various Gestapo governments in the United States don't understand this simple fact of life. So when you put a mask on, you are accumulating viruses and other pathogens on the mask. Okay? You have a thing on the front of your face called a nose. Okay? The nose has, if you're lucky, has two openings. Okay? Those are called the nasal passages. All right? At the end of the nasal passages is a thing called the olfactory nerve. And this may be deep water for some people, you know, but stick with me. So that olfactory nerve is literally, it's a cranial nerve. It's a direct nerve from your nose, from the inside of your nose, straight to your brain. It's a direct line. It's like your optic nerve. The optic nerve also has a direct line. It's very, very powerful, highly wired, close to the brain nerves. And they go directly into the brain. Okay? And believe it or not, if you accumulate a lot of pathogens in your nasal passages, they will get on the olfactory nerve. And the olfactory nerve actually runs straight to the brain. I know this is going to be news to many physicians in America, because they're allowing their patients to endure this insanity without saying a word. All right? But I'm going to read the sentence again. It is not at all dramatic what he's saying. This is called reality, and it's called anatomy. There are two subjects that people used to study in the pre-pandemic era. You know, now we have a new branch of science, and it's called whatever comes out of Fauci's ass that day is now science. And of course, that gets passed on to the idiot government officials throughout the land. So anyway, let's hear again this statement. By wearing a mask, the exhaled viruses will not be able to escape and will concentrate in the nasal passages, enter the olfactory nerves, and travel into the brain. That's how it works, folks. That's why if you're a union painter in the state of New York, you cannot be compelled to wear a face mask on the job. This is pre-pandemic. Until you had a formal sign-off by a cardiopulmonary specialist that you were healthy enough to wear a mask for prolonged periods. How many, I could almost weep here, okay? How many elderly, infirm individuals are walking around with masks on all day, who, if they were union painters, would have been told, sorry, you're not healthy enough to wear a mask. And yet we have millions of people who should not be wearing a face mask for health reasons wearing these masks. This is the doing of Tony Fauci, serial liar, serial fraud, serial unindicted criminal, and all the idiot news people and all the idiot politicians who have followed his very, very poor lead. This guy knows nothing about public health, never did. In fact, he's responsible for one of the biggest public health catastrophes in human history, and we're not even talking about the pandemic. And as time allows, we'll do a report on that one. But bottom line, ain't a good idea to wear a mask. Let me continue from Dr. Blaylock, a real doctor. Researchers found that about 1/3 of workers developed headaches with use of a mask. Most had pre-existing headaches that were worsened by the mask wearing, and 60% required pain medications for relief. And I'm sure Fauci's friends in pharma couldn't be happier. Maybe we could prescribe some Vioxx to them. Vioxx, by the way, was a Merck product that was sold as a headache remedy that caused between 200 and 300,000 heart attacks, deaths. Not just heart attacks, full-fledged deaths. But let's forget that story because we can trust everybody in the pharma business at all times. Yeah, I'm pissed. I am pissed. As to the headaches, while straps and pressure from the mask could be causative, the bulk of the evidence points towards hypoxia, which means not getting enough oxygen, and or hypercapnia as the cause. That is a reduction of blood oxygen, hypoxia, or an elevation of blood CO2, hypercapnia. Okay, so we've done a couple of shows about this, but why not repeat it? If you're wearing a mask, you're getting less oxygen and more carbon dioxide. Okay, since you're not a plant, unless Fauci's changed that, maybe we should check. Maybe Governor Cuomo or Newsom or Pritzker has changed biological reality, and now human beings now are plants. So we can breathe carbon dioxide now, and we don't need oxygen. So that's always possible. I'll check Andrew Cuomo's website to make sure that I'm the right biological entity that I'm supposed to be, because whatever he says goes. It is known that N95 masks, if worn for hours, can reduce blood oxygenation as much as 20%. That's a lot, folks. Which can lead to, it can lead to a loss of consciousness, as can happen to the hapless fellow driving around alone in a car wearing an N95 mask, causing him to pass out, to crash his car, and sustain injuries. I am sure that we have had several cases of elderly individuals or any person with poor lung function passing out, hitting their head, and so on. This, of course, can lead to death. A more recent study involving 159 healthcare workers aged 21 to 35 of age have found that 81% developed headaches from wearing a face mask. Some had pre-existing headaches that were precipitated by the masks. All felt like the headaches affected their work performance. Okay, Dr. Blaylock. Well, fair enough. That's what the study said. He's just repeating something so blazingly obvious that I guess it had to go in the report. Now, here's where we get to some very important things here. Unfortunately, no one is telling the frail elderly and those with lung diseases such as COPD, emphysema, or pulmonary fibrosis of the dangers of wearing a facial mask of any kind, which can cause a severe worsening of lung function. This also includes lung cancer patients and people having had lung surgery, especially with partial resection and even the removal of a whole lung. And it gets worse. The importance of these findings is that a drop in oxygen levels, hypoxia, is associated with an impairment of immunity. It's almost unbelievable we even have to talk about it. It's something so freaking obvious. Your immune system runs on oxygen. Studies have shown that hypoxia can inhibit the type of main immune cells used to fight viral infections called the CD4 plus T lymphocyte. This occurs because the hypoxia increases the level of a compound called hypoxia-inducible factor 1, HIF1, which inhibits T lymphocytes and stimulates a powerful immune inhibitor called the TREGs. This sets the stage for contracting any infection, including COVID-19, and making the consequences of that infection much graver. In essence, your mask may well put you at an increased risk of infections and so on, and thus having a much worse outcome. So a lot of technical stuff there. I guess it was necessary, but you have to understand, it's your oxygen that fuels your body, which includes your immune system and includes the functioning of all your organs. We know that maybe Pritzker and Newsom and Cuomo have changed that too, at the direction of Dr. Fauci. But when your organs don't get oxygen, you die. And simply reducing oxygen to someone can cause them to pass out or get sick. I know this is radical medical insight that's probably boggling everybody's mind right now, because now we live in a new era, right? Things will never be the same. We're never going back. We're now in a world where up is down and down is up and white is black and black is white, and we don't need oxygen anymore. We should concentrate pathogens in our nasal passages all day long. We should tell the old and the frail that they need to wear masks 24/7, even though it flies in the face of everything that anybody has ever known about medicine. But all that stuff's out the window now. We're in a new era. We're in the Cuomo, Newsom, Pritzker, Fauci era. People with cancer, and especially this is criminal. What these people are doing. This is pure criminality. People with cancer, especially if the cancer has spread, will be at further risk from prolonged hypoxia as the cancer grows best in a microenvironment that is low in oxygen. If you didn't know that, you know it now. You want to induce cancer in people, cut down on their oxygen supply. Low oxygen also promotes inflammation, which can promote the growth, invasion, and spread of cancers, and every other physical problem, by the way. Repeated episodes of hypoxia have been proposed as a significant factor in atherosclerosis, which I can never pronounce correctly, and hence increases all cardiovascular heart attacks and cerebral vascular, that's strokes, diseases. So if it's not enough that you're reducing your overall immune function, if it's not enough that you're increasing the odds you might pass out, if it's not enough that it's going to induce headaches in 80%, 81% of young healthy people that wear these things, it might stimulate a heart attack or a stroke. But Andrew Cuomo's not worried about that because he's on the phone with Dr. Fauci every day. Which, by the way, you should know that that's the case. Fauci was very good friends with Cuomo's father, the former governor of New York. And Chris Cuomo is on record, on video, as saying that Fauci is in touch with them daily. Just so you know that. Just so you know where the insanity in New York State is coming from. It's coming from the top. There is another danger to wearing these masks on a daily basis, especially if worn for several hours. When a person is infected with a respiratory virus, they will expel some of the virus with each breath. If they are wearing a mask, especially an N95 mask or other tightly fitting masks, they will be constantly breathing the viruses, raising the concentration of the virus in the lungs and the nasal passages. We know that the people who have the worst they're murdering people, guys. right? When they stick somebody on a ventilator and they haven't even bothered to see what their actual real physical health problem is, they're murdering them. And here's the other way they're murdering them. Okay, so listen up. We know that people that have had the worst reactions to the coronavirus have the highest concentrations of the virus early on. And this leads to the deadly cytokine storm in a select number. Okay, so if someone's already vulnerable, and maybe they have a touch of COVID, now you put a mask on them, and now they're concentrating the COVID. And it's the people who have these high concentrations, and this might be why some healthcare workers have gotten sick, in addition to the fact they're obese, diabetes, emphysema, asthma, all the other comorbidities that they all have. All the ones that have died all have comorbidities. There's never been a case of a healthy person getting this and dying.
Okay, that was pretty informative, wasn't it? So if you wear a mask now, let me tell you, then like I said, you're crazier than a loon, but they're forcing you to. So at times, what I recommend, like I said, walk up to the guy, and say, hey, did you drop that dollar bill on the floor? And pick it up and just wave it in front of him. Maybe he'll take it and let you in without the mask. So anyway, if not, put it on for a second, don't breathe, then when you go in there, take it down. Just wear it on your chin. Who's going to say anything? That's all they care about. But anyway, don't wear the mask, especially if you have to wear it for long periods of time. You just heard it. I mean, I got an idea. Here's what probably you'll hear tomorrow. You'll hear Dr. Fauci or somebody say, okay, we've learned that the best way to protect yourself is to put a piece of masking tape over your mouth and then a clothespin on your nose. That's the next step, folks. And you know what? People would do it. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.